Mau make a
Hi, everybody. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and start with our event. Is the slide awesome? Megan's awesome. Okay, so if you'd like to come up and speak, you can. We're gonna have Levi speak. Thank you everybody who came.
Fantastic. So how do I control? Can I control it from here? Yeah, because I can see it here. We'll just pass this on. Okay. Okay. This would be fun. All right, fantastic. Hello, everyone. That's virtual Scott. Hello. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about self-injury awareness. So yeah, just turn that towards me. So March 1st sort of coincides with the beginning of Self-Injury Awareness Day. Today's the last day, so we're just going to be talking a little bit about some stats, facts. We'll talk a little bit about how to ask someone about non-suicidal self-injury, and then we'll have a little discussion about like some previous, like how NSSI was categorized in like the DSM-5 and things like that. So I have a pretty interesting lecture for y'all today. But before we get started, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'll let Scott do so. So my name is Levi Rex. I'm one of the Wellbeing Education Coordinators at Wellbeing Services. So I specialize specifically in like mental health. I've been working in that area. I started off in the suicide prevention grant. So I've been in this field for quite a while. I do outreach presentations, trainings, events, things like that, just of those nature. Scott?
My name is Scott. I'm one of the Wellbeing Services interns. I primarily work with the Wellbeing Initiative, but also get to help with presentations and stuff.
So Scott will be helping me out today, and I'm excited to get started. All right. Okay. All right. So first things first, what exactly is self-injury? So does anyone want to take a stab at defining non-suicidal self-injury? I know we kind of have something up there, but if you have a bit more clinical version, or if you're aware, would you mind sharing?
Treating yourself without the intent of suicide.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk a little bit about that, like suicidal self-injury as opposed to non-suicidal self-injury. But typically, non-suicidal self-injury, or just self-injury in general, is a behavior in which participants may harm themselves more, or intentionally hurt themselves more likely on the outside of the body. So we're talking about behaviors like cutting, burning, poking, hair pulling, or even attempting to overdose. So utilizing like pills, chemicals, or drugs to harm oneself. Those all sort of fall under those behaviors. I know like that attempting to overdose is sort of overlooked, but that definitely falls into those signs and the categories. So before we get started and really get into the crux of what we're talking about, I did want to sort of bring this up. While we were doing some research about this presentation and this specific mental health issue, we found that it's sort of like, I don't want to say controversial in terms of like, it's just been debated and sort of looked through pretty rigorously. So in previous editions of the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Health, or I'm sorry, mental disorders, which I'm sure y'all are more than familiar with. In previous renditions of this, it was sort of NSSIs were a symptom of borderline personality disorders. So in order to sort of be diagnosed with and sort of be treated for NSSIs, you had to also be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And some experts felt like this change gave mental health professionals the ability to explore and treat clients in SSI without giving them that diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, especially because while we're talking about this, we'll really be talking and focusing on like young adults and adolescents. And as we'll sort of delve into later on, what we more often find is that NSSI in young adults or adolescents, it's more of like a coping mechanism or coping strategy, as opposed to something like attempting suicide or something like that. But some others argue that, separating the two would cause some individuals to have mental health concerns overlooked. So, obviously, when we're talking about NSSI, we should be wary of other mental health risks or issues or disorders that may be sort of comorbid with these signs and symptoms. But experts have also said that there needs to be more rigorous testing of this criteria. So as y'all know, the DSM is constantly updated and changed, and the criteria are scrutinized and looked at. So in the future, we may see another change or another addition or additional missing another change. However, we're seeing a lot of research on NSSI now that it's sort of been separated from borderline personality disorder. So when we're talking about like this debate and this sort of rhetoric around NSSI and suicidal self-injury, so on the left and on y'all's right, if you're virtual, it's sort of categorized as like not intended as a suicide attempt, but more as like a coping mechanism or coping strategy, which we'll talk about, used to manage overwhelming feelings, either to like sort of impose like a punishment upon oneself, or escaping some sort of responsibility or negative feelings or emotions or something like that. It can be used to cope with intense anger, frustration, or emotional pain. So those sort of like big, sort of inescapable emotions, anger, guilt, shame, we're all sort of like rolled into this. And then, it can be sort of followed by this, or follow this momentary release followed by guilt and shame. So one interesting, and I don't mean interesting as in like, one thing about this is that it's sort of like a feedback loop. So, an individual feels bad, so they participate in self-injury, and then they may feel better for a little bit, but then they feel even worse because they've harmed themselves, and obviously your body, your mental well-being don't sort of deal with that very well. So it can just sort of cycle and get out of hand if not treated properly. On the right side and on y'all's left side, we have the sort of suicidal self-injury symptoms or description. So this is more of a severe risk. Signs of a deeper mental distress or disorder or negative life events. And we'll be talking a little bit about negative life events, specifically in young adults and adolescents. And this also displays a lack of coping mechanisms or a lack of resiliency or something like that. Scott, I believe you're right.
So the next part kind of talks about like who's at risk for NSSI and kind of like the common trends. So as I'm sure y'all are aware, for a lot of mental health issues and just issues in general, it can affect anyone. So people from any ethnicity, socioeconomic status, or education can engage in it. And then just some of the common trends, typically more unmarried or single individuals engage in NSSI instead of those who are like in couples or like married. Additionally, people who are part of sexual and gender minorities, so including anyone that's part of the LGBTQ+ community can engage in it. Just because if they're going through something, sometimes it's easier to just do an SSI as a coping mechanism than like, yeah. Also, women are 1.5 times more likely to engage in self-injury, but there might also be a discrepancy because males are less likely to report. So even though we're seeing statistically that women are more likely, it could also be that it's the same, it's just men aren't reporting it to the same degree. And then also with it too, young adolescents, adults and adolescents are also at risk. So about 17% of adolescents have engaged self-injury in some form. And then the next one is just talking about other risk factors. So thinking about like the things that we go through, situations and stuff that can lead to it. So some are childhood history of abuse eating disorders of any kind, borderline personality disorder. I kind of like what Levi was talking about with like the DSM-5 and how those were playing together. Also post-traumatic stress disorder, substance use disorders, depression, and anxiety disorders. Passing it back to you.
All right, so while we've been running through this, I've been talking a lot about like coping mechanisms, coping strategies, and I did want to sort of elaborate on that a little more before we dive into like how to assist and how to help. So first things first, what exactly is coping? And this is defined by Folkman and Moskowitz, and they stated that coping is defined as the thoughts and behaviors mobilized to manage internal and external stressful situations. So essentially, the mechanisms and strategies that we utilize to sort of deal with the internal and external pressures of life. So not only are there like the external things that we sort of have to deal with, like other people and like our responsibilities and our tasks, and deadlines, and things like that. But there's also the internal sort of stress factors. So like how we view ourselves, our self-esteem, internal self-talk, things like that. And a 2011 book suggests that self-injury, specifically in young adults and adolescents, may sometimes be used instead as a coping mechanism. So this before, it was sort of seen as like part of a personality disorder or something like that. But now, at least specifically in those young adult and adolescent populations, we're seeing that it may actually be, in fact, a form of a coping mechanism or an unhealthy coping mechanism. So thinking about like life events and some of the things that we've touched on, risk factors. So what are some life events, risk factors, things like that in young adults that may lead them to, participate in SSI? Think of anything? Going to college? Yeah, it's a very stressful time, a lot of changes. You're moving, meeting new friends, leaving friends and family. Yeah. Dealing with a parent's divorce, especially in that adolescent stage. So unfortunately, just statistics, a lot of parents get divorced while their children get older. So that may be another life event that may affect the adolescent pretty heavily. Anything else? So not just like your regular exams, but so those big ones. So the SAT and the ACT, yeah, they're so not only do those like, sort of give you a precursor or sort of show you where you're gonna like this affect you in college, but they're also maybe like external as well. Maybe your parents want you to do really well, or your professors, or your teachers, or something like that. Thanks for sharing. Oh, I'll move on to the next slide. Oh, this one's yours. Yeah.
So the next one is just kind of talking about the signs and symptoms of NSSI. So it kind of splits between the two sources that we're looking at. So I'll cover the part that we found from the Mayo Clinic first, and then I'll talk about the mental health first aid training stuff too. So for the Mayo Clinic, some like signs and symptoms that you can see for someone who might be engaging in NSSI is kind of scars, but more in patterns. So can you help me elaborate on that one? You did a good job, better than I can.
When we're talking like patterns and lines, shapes, something like that. So when we cut ourselves or when we normally like get injured, like our injuries aren't like in straight lines or something like that. Like they can be, but more often than not, when we're cut or we hurt ourselves, like the scar is all jagged and it feels weird. But when we're talking about something like this, it may be like in straight lines or shapes. So just thinking about like the general injuries that you get, like just from day-to-day life, maybe you doing some physical labor or something like that. But we're talking about something that's a little more, a little too neat to be like those daily injuries that we may accrue like over time.
Thank you. And then with that too is just kind of like fresh wounds. So if you start to realize too that like they have quite a few injuries, kind of skipping a bullet really quick, frequent accidental injuries. So if you kind of see like a trend of like, hey, like you're getting injured kind of like every day or like very quickly, like more than you would expect for like a clumsy, like I'm clumsy, but I don't get hurt every day. But like that type of thing is so just looking out for trends and kind of like that type of thing with it. Also burn and rub marks. So this can be anything between like a stove, a burner, any type of thing, and they can kind of like appear differently. So also thinking too of kind of like the placement of the burn too, which I'll cover a little bit more later. Another one too, kind of like what we've been touching on throughout the whole thing, is just mental health concerns. Like Levi was mentioning, it can be an unhealthy form of coping. So thinking of that and how it relates to it, and then kind of statements of hopelessness. So if you see someone that's kind of like feeling down consistently, they might be more likely. And then kind of more on the mental health first aid side is kind of going into that more of just emotions such as anguish, hopelessness, and helplessness. Kind of like what we were talking about before, there's a lot of different life events that we go through. So just being mindful of how people are like coping through it. Also like elusive behavior, watching videos about self-injury and kind of like starting to do research into it. And then this one is the one that I kind of touched on before, but kind of inappropriate clothing for the weather to hide injuries and scars. So thinking of the placement of like burns or injuries. So of course, like if it's super hot and you see someone with like turtleneck and long sleeves, then you can kind of like question it. Of course, there's a pattern with it too. But just being mindful of that. And like, of course, if it's super hot, you want to dress like for the weather. And then things such as changed eating and sleeping habits. And then Levi, see you raised hand. Do you want to ask for it now or later?
We can do it now.
It says, say if it's in the, it says, what would elusive behavior look like?
Yeah, so that would be things like, you know, maybe skipping appointments that y'all might have with like friends or family. It could be like when you ask questions about like, oh, like where'd you get that cut or burn or whatever, you know, they like either deflect, redirect, or don't really answer your question. So just generally like behaviors in which you can tell someone's trying to hide something, but you know, they're probably not, you're noticing like signs and symptoms. And when you sort of call them out on it, they're just, you know, not really answering your questions. They may, you know, make up some of them, you know, accidental injuries, like, oh, I, you know, walked into something, I fell down some stairs or something like that. So that's generally what we're talking about when we're referring to like elusive behaviors.
Mm-hmm. So the next,
Okay, so yeah, sorry, I added this like right before we got here, but I did want to sort of prepare y'all for like you know, oh, can they not see that? Oh, no. Okay. Let me, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna just for this slide. So when we're talking about how to ask someone, especially in regards of a mental health concern, one thing that we want to do is, you know, we can use a lot of these risk factors and signs and symptoms as context clues, but we should never use them as like confirmation of accusation. So just because they're a member of, you know, a particularly affected community or they exhibit these signs and symptoms, we shouldn't just assume. So the best way to tell if someone is engaging in a certain behavior or having certain issues is to ask them. So how to ask someone about non-suicidal injuries? It's a lot like if you've ever taken our gatekeeper training or something like that. It's very simple. You're going to be firm and be direct. You're going to utilize the words like self-injury or non-suicidal self-injury, something like that. And then ask in a way that requires a yes or no answer. So no open-ended questions or anything like that. Some don'ts. Don't use any wording, you know, like, oh, you're hurting yourself or something like that. We want to sort of keep it specific in terms of self-injury and then ask in a judgmental way. So when we say something like, it's like, oh, you never do anything like that, would you? Or, oh, you never cut yourself or something like that. Like that just sort of shows like immediately like, oh, this, I probably just talked to them about this, like they see this in a negative light. And we'll talk a little bit more about like, you know, no negative responses. Hope y'all could hear me. No, go ahead.
So I know that this happens like in people and in adolescents. So what if an adolescent doesn't understand injury?
Yeah.
So how would we ask them then?
So I would so if we're talking like they may not be familiar with that concept, I would sort of talk about that first. So like I would say something to the effect of, sometimes when people are dealing with some of the things, so point out life events like, your parents are divorced or you're having a hard time at school or you're being bullied or something like that. So I see you're dealing with these things. Sometimes people that, deal with these things and feel, if you can identify emotions, hopelessness, helplessness, anger, shame, things like that. People who deal with and feel these things oftentimes participate or, cut themselves or hurt themselves to sort of explain like what exactly self-injury is. It's a coping mechanism, but it's not a healthy coping mechanism. We want to like move away from that. And then like ask them about it. So just sort of giving them that, you don't have to go and like pull out the DSM-5 and, read the definition and all that, but just sort of walking them through that, like, especially if it is a younger person, because younger humans, their prefrontal cortex hasn't developed yet, so they don't, see like steps and, forward progression planning and things like that. So, they may just think like, oh, well, I hurt myself and the pain goes away for a little bit, and that's sort of how they see it. But if we just sort of come at it like, people who deal with these things and feel these emotions sometimes participate in this certain behavior, have you, done this? Have you like, participate in self-injury? Have you, cut yourself, burned yourself, something like that intentionally? Hope that answers your question. I think this one's yours. Is this mine? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the next line is going to be like so once you've, sorry, lost my train of thought. Once you like ask the question and ask them about NSSI, and here's some things that you can do to help them. So express care and concern. So obviously if you're talking to someone, you're caring for them and you're like putting in the effort to ask them. So with that too, kind of show that you care too. Listen and validate them. So it's okay for them to feel these feelings that they're going through. I'm sure that we've all felt like some of those feelings before. So just kind of like validating and be like, yeah, like I'm hearing what you're saying. And then refrain from negative responses. This can sometimes have like a negative in this context, but it can kind of like create like the stigma of it. So then it also too, you kind of want people to like keep going, or sorry, I lost my train of thought and I don't know where I'm going with it. But yeah, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but I feel like you got it. And then just offer resources for people too. This can be either on campus or off campus. So even like after we're all graduated onto our big kid lives, you can offer some like community resources too. So look into like what's around. And then also like while we're still a student, Levi's going to talk about, well, both options too, around town. And then recommend reaching out to mental health professionals. And if you can, try to like recommend or even walk them through the process, because it can be really daunting doing it yourself. So just having someone like walk through it, or even like I've asked my friend to just be like, can you just be here like while I'm doing this, and just like the like peer like support. Yes. And then also suggest alternate coping strategies, which we'll talk about a little bit more, which I think is on the next one. Yes. Okay, cool. So speaking of alternative coping strategies, so there's things that you can do for anyone that can dealing with NSSI and just even stress in general. Specifically for NSSI, be the coping strategy for them. So kind of help interact with them. If they're like secluding themselves or being elusive, try to be like, hey, we haven't talked for a while, we haven't hung out, let's like connect and go do something. You can like have a coffee run and be like, you know what, we've been working on this for a while, let's just go grab some Starbucks or Java City or whatever. And then just chat with them. You can also go for walks. I know like myself, like I like going for walks, and it's nice to just have someone to talk to sometimes. And then I take them out to lunch or dinner, you know, either treat yourself or treat each other if you can. Sometimes that's just nice too, and escape from reality for a little bit. You can also recommend other coping strategies. So reaching out to friends or family, so using like your peer resources and your support system, and then engaging in a hobby interest, then it removes them from the such stressful situations. So kind of like going back to like hobbies and stuff that they find interest in. So let's say that they really like painting, then be like, hey, like, how do you go paint? Or hey, there's art, yeah, go to that. Or like go to an event or get involved in a student organization and get your like mind off of it. Or invite them like, hey, I have the cool Student Psychology Association meeting, come join us. Like even that can be like a big difference. And then I'll pass it back off to Levi.
So another thing that we can do to assist individuals is by providing, like, you know, we have technology. We can utilize apps to assist with our mental health. So some of these that we have, you will have to pay for. So like Smiling Mind, Headspace, Calm. Ever since they got LeBron James to do those commercials, man, now they charge us for it. They got to pay it somehow. Stop Breathe and Think is a good one. Thrive at UT is something that is provided by the UT system. So you can download that via Apple or Google Pay. Another one is Wobot, which is a sort of digital, like little chat format that teaches you like mindfulness exercises, some, you know, helpful thinking, things like that. Another thing that that is really helpful is YouTube. So there are like literally millions of YouTube videos on like guided meditations, you know, relaxing, helping you do things like that. Oh, someone has a question. Fantastic. Is it in the chat?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, there's two keyboards in front of me, so I don't know which one to use. Okay.
You got it.
Okay, so Tavia says, I feel like emphasizing that people aren't a burden to be around if they're feeling down is pretty important. Otherwise, sometimes people won't want to get out and do something. I definitely agree. That was really good, Tavia. Emphasize that, you know, sometimes when people are in these situations, and not just in SSIs, when we're talking about like suicidal ideation and things like that, one of the big things, actually, I'm going to go off on a little tangent. I'm sorry. So two things that I've noticed in sort of these circles and mental health issues, when we're talking about like self-injury and suicide and things like that, is I always fall back to Dr. Thomas Joyner, and he did, it's the Interpersonal Theory of Suicide. So if you have like an hour to spare, he has a lecture on YouTube called the Interpersonal Theory of Suicide. And he kind of made this diagram or like a graph on how to like predict whether or not someone is going to have like essentially self-harm tendencies. And the first criteria is thwarted belongingness, or I don't belong. And then the second thing is perceived burdensomeness, or I am a burden. So when you like start to see those like feelings or emotions, or like, you know, someone talk about like, oh, I'm a burden, you know, everyone would be better off without me, or, you know, I don't belong, I don't have anyone or anywhere to be, or, you know, I can't be myself, or something like that. Those are really sort of like really concerning precursors to like, you know, a lethal or near lethal suicide attempt. I didn't put that on the presentation, but I probably should have, because it does sort of fall into that, like that, you know, feeling like you're part of a community, or feeling like you belong, and feeling like you're not a burden, are two like big like precursors to some of those like mental health crises and issues. So here's some resources that we sort of collected. So we have the crisis text line, which you can reach by texting 741-741, and you can do that via phone. We have, I'm sorry, I forgot to fix that. It's To Write Love on Her Arms, which is a resource finder. So if you want to reach out to someone specifically who handles, you know, intentional self-injury or something like that, that's a great resource. We also have NAMI, does some lectures, seminars, and has other resources on NSSIs. And there's actually a chapter here in San Antonio. They have like a small headquarters here. Of course, there's the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which you can reach at 1-800-273-TALK. And then, of course, the UTSA Crisis Line, which you can reach at 210-458-4140 and pressing option 3 when prompted. And then we also have the Wellbeing Services and the Wellness 360 Counseling Center. So this is just a little more information about the Wellbeing Services. So we provide services and programs, events, groups, and workshops, all based in the 8 dimensions of well-being. I'm sure y'all are more than familiar with all the 8 dimensions and everything like that. We've partnered in past events. But if you're interested in anything that we're doing, you can always check out our Routing Link page. That's where we put everything, all our events, everything we've got going on. We also have our Collegiate Recovery Center for students who are dealing with addiction. And NSSIs in some forms or treatments may be sort of acted on as like a form of addiction or something like that. So they do physical, chemical, or emotional addictions. They're located over at the JPL 4th floor. We have the Peace Center. So Peace stands for Prevention, Education, Advocacy, Consultation, and Empowerment. And they handle domestic, sexual violence, harassment, interpersonal violence, things like that. We also provide trainings on things like suicide prevention, mental health first aid, and Green Dot, which is a bystander intervention training that focuses specifically on like sexual assault and harassment, but some of the skills you learn there can be transferable to other things. We also do outreach presentations such as these. You can always check out our outreach request form on the Wellbeing Services website, or y'all can just like reach out to me. That's fine too. We also have our mental health peer educators. So these are students who have been trained in mental health first aid, Campus Connect, motivational interviewing, and non-judgmental listening. And they assist us with outreach and education, but they also have the ability to meet one-on-one with students. So just like a peer mentor, peer support type program. And then we also have our health peer educators. So these are students who go out on campus and teach and talk on specific health topics, ranging from like flu, like vaccinations, sexual health, getting STI tested, things like that. And we're located over at the RWC. So does everyone know where the Recreation Wellness Center is? Yeah, they're like right next to us, so they know. But it's over near the rec, right across from it. It's the rec is hard to miss, and we're that tiny little building right next to it. And then this is just a little more information about the counseling center. So I'm sure y'all are all aware by now, but our counseling center sort of went through a transition this past summer. So the clinical portions of what was previously counseling and mental health services and the student health services now are overseen by UT Health Science Center, and it is now Wellness 360. So there are two we're all well-being services. It's just like the clinic portion is contracted out. So they still we still communicate with them, we promote them and talk about what they do. They just like they do work for UTSA, but not really. It's really confusing, but they do work here on campus, and they can still see students and assist them in those ways. So they have things like well-being workshops on anxiety, depression, and mindfulness. Those are all virtual right now, but hopefully in the future we can get some more in-person groups going. We also have things like biofeedback, virtual support groups, short-term individual therapy, same-day appointments. So if you're looking to be seen that same day and it's not like a crisis or something like that, we do recommend that you call early in the morning at around 8:15, 8:30. If you're looking to be seen that day. If it doesn't really matter when you're seen, you can call whenever. And then, of course, if it is a crisis, feel free to walk in at any time. We have clinicians on demand that are available to see students in crisis. We also have some self-care apps like MySSP and Thrive at UT. And then, of course, our crisis line, which I did talk a little bit about earlier. We can also refer out to the community. So we have counselors, social workers, case managers that can refer out to the community at low or no cost. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to 210-458-4140 for more information. And then they are also located over at the RWC, right across from our office. And of course, like if you need to find it or you get lost or something like that, you can always call them and like they'll have someone meet you out there or something like that. And then there was a downtown location, but with the transition and everything that's going on, it's not open quite yet, and I'm not sure when it will be open again. Oh, and those are all my sources. You gotta cite your sources, everybody. Don't ever forget that. We're gonna be doing that for a long time. But that will conclude our presentation. I guess I'll open it up to questions.
What is considered a crisis?
So a crisis is when your normal coping mechanisms that you utilize don't really work anymore. So the everyday things that you use to sort of cope with your crisis, your coping mechanisms and strategies, when those no longer work, that's when you sort of fall into what defines as like a crisis. Any other questions? Any other questions about like counseling, how that works? We have some events coming up in April. So April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So we'll be working with our Peace Center on quite a few things. So I know like next Tuesday, we have Ebony Stewart, who is a slam poet. She'll be coming and performing some of her pieces. I know she's gonna be talking about like healthy relationships, sexual assault, some mental health issues and concerns and things like that. So that's next Tuesday, April 5th at 6 o'clock in the HB Ballroom. And then if you also check out our website, we have a lot of other stuff. We have a website, so if you go to our website, you can always check out, sort of the trainings and things that we have going on. We'll also be bringing back some of the stress down activities that we had last semester. So like the paint a pot and slime thing. We're not going to do the slime again. It was so hard cleaning that out of the carpet and stuff. And like, it's not anyone's fault. It's slime. It's going to get messy, but we'll be doing things like candle decorating. We're giving away desk pets and things like that. So we'll be putting those up on Rowdy Link and our social medias as well. If you're interested, we'd love to see y'all. So I'll check the chat real quick to see if there are any questions. All right. Okay. So Celia asked, how do you reach out to someone who you believe could be utilizing NSSI, but they live in a different state than you? I feel like it would be hard to know for sure without seeing the person physically. That's a really good question. However, I would still say lean onto like the life events. So if some of those life events, some of those behaviors and things that we talked about earlier. So signs and symptoms and life events. So pointing those out and just, again, being upfront, being direct with them, saying like, hey, I've noticed you've been doing this and this and this. People who do this engage in NSSI. Have you been sort of, engaging in self-injury or something like that? Now, actually getting them that assistance if they're out of state can be difficult. I would recommend like maybe calling the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline or the crisis line, just to see if maybe like they can gather resources in that area. So like if you know their area, maybe you can gather resources to them or for them and then send it to them. And hopefully you can like encourage them, help them walk them through the process. I know you're not going to be there physically, but you could just help them with that process, so that like to write Love on Her Arms that I talked about, that sort of finds a mental health professional that deals with NSSI in a specific area. So that may be helpful. I know like in this new virtual age, like we're all able to be connected from long distances, but like when we need to like, it can be difficult to do these sorts of things and check in on people like mentally and physically when we can't really be there with them. But that was a great question, Celia. Thank you.
Can you talk about the
Yeah, so the Mental Health Peer Advocate Program is a program we actually started last year. So it was created by Catherine Rico, who is a graduate assistant over at Message. And she, partnered with us and wanted to sort of create this program. So essentially what it is they are cohorts of students. So we'll actually be like starting the applications or sending out like we'll be recruiting in April. And so it's just like, we do ask for some requirements. So we do ask for like a year commitment. So like we do these fall, spring, and that you have a specific GPA. We don't discriminate based on majors. So you can be any major and you can still participate. And then we do ask for like 6 to 8 hours of in-office time just to assist us with like outreach, education, and making sure you're available for the one-on-ones. So the one-on-ones that I talked about are just meetings that they can set up with students or students can set up with them. And it's like 30 minutes, confidential, non-judgmental. And then like there's an orientation as well. You sort of have to be trained, but it's nothing too extensive. Like it's mental health first aid, Campus Connect, things like that, which I believe like most of y'all have received. But we'll just, sort of be doing all that, like how we train all our interns and volunteers and things like that. So if y'all are interested, just keep an eye out on our social media and our routing link. We'll be posting those applications probably by next week. Yeah, and I have some information about them. If y'all just want to, set up a meeting with them and talk to them. I know finals is coming up, things like that. So that'd be an excellent resource. Any other questions? Anything else? No? All right, fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for your participation and your attention. Thank you all who attended virtually. And if y'all think of any questions afterwards, y'all can just y'all have my contact information. So y'all can just send it to them and then they can send it to me and that'll work. But thank you all so much. I hope y'all have a great day at the Fiesta event tomorrow. Good luck. If I have time, I'll stop by. But yeah, if y'all need anything else from us, just y'all can reach out to me.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Make sure to sign out.